In 5:15 we have an interesting verse. Naaman is healed and he says, "Now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel." So that's an amazing statement, and that really is more of a monotheistic statement. Well, this is someone who is just healed, and so it's an exclamation, it's an emotional statement. Yet the theology behind it is much more monotheistic than we've seen in the Hebrew Scriptures. So I point that out to you in 5:15. In chapter 6, we have another miracle story that is reminiscent of the miracles of Jesus. This is the miracle of the floating iron axe head. Makes it float. So this could be a precursor of the story of Jesus walking on water. In chapter 9, we see this unbelievably violent and grotesque prophecy about the death of Jezebel. Jezebel had oppressed prophets who spoke in the name of Yahweh. She was more of a follower of other gods. So chapter 9, but here we have in 36, in the territory of Jezreel, the dog shall eat the flesh of Jezebel. The corpse of Jezebel shall be like dung on the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, this is Jezebel. And yeah, she will have a bloody death. In 10:11, we have this. Jehu killed all who were left of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, all his leaders, close friends, and priests, until he left him no survivor. So even within Israel, we've seen this before, the problem of succession, when you have one house or one son or one faction take power, the sad fact is that you want to consolidate that power, and you do that by killing off the followers and family of the previous regime. One of the major themes in this book is that the kings of Israel and sometimes the kings of Judah would not have just unique worship of Yahweh. So they were syncretists. They brought in other religions. So they had a multifaceted religion. They worshiped different gods. And we've seen this all the way back to Solomon. But in the book of Kings, we've seen this a lot. We've seen they put up high places, Asherah, sacred poles, make sacrifices to other deities, make figurines of divine beings. And that is contemptible. And that is the reason for the destruction of Israel that is going to be claimed by Assyria. And we're seeing the beginnings of that in chapters 15 and 16. So that is why you get this constant theme of condemning Israel for these practices, because that's going to be the reason, it is said, that Assyria conquers them, although Assyria probably would have incorporated them into its empire anyway. And they were probably practicing syncretism, and they were having many gods. So we see in 1529, in the days of King Pekah of Israel, King Tilgalath-Pileser of Assyria came and captured a whole variety of cities, and Gilead, and all in Galilee, and the land of Naphtali, and he carried the people captive to Assyria. And this would be a theme that they don't kill everyone. The Assyrian Empire and the Babylonian Empire take the skilled workers, metal workers, literate people who can read and write, because that's a specific skill to help them run their empire. And they don't do this genocidal warfare. It's more of enslaving the peoples. And in chapter 16, we have Ahaz ruling in Israel. He did not do what was right in the sight of Yahweh. He even made his son pass through fire. So that is 16:3. So that is some sort of practice. I don't think that was using his son as a sacrifice, a complete sacrifice, a complete burning to death, but it was some sort of practice. And it's not quite clear exactly what that is. Ahaz decides, well, Assyria is just this massive empire, and instead of being destroyed, he will become the servant of Assyria. So Judah will become a vassal state. They will be allowed some autonomy. They may have to pay a tribute. They won't go to war with Assyria, and Assyria won't come in and invade and destroy them. We're in chapter 17, and this is a very important chapter historically. Hoshea is now ruling in Samaria of Israel, and King Shalmaneser of Assyria comes up against him, uh, in part because we'll see this theme of Israel and Judah trying to make alliances with Egypt or Assyria, and one or the other doesn't like it, obviously, because they want their vassal states to be loyal. So in verse 5, then the king of Assyria invaded all the land and came to Samaria, so the capital city of Israel in the north. For 3 years he besieged it. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. He carried the Israelites away to Assyria. He placed them in Hala, etc. So he forces them into exile. So the two empires wanted to have these small buffer states, and they wanted the allegiance of those buffer states, so in between Assyria and Egypt. And so in this sense, Israel, the country, the nation of Israel, was not loyal enough, so Assyria comes in and besieges Samaria and conquers it. And this is in 722, 721 BCE, and Samaria falls and becomes the defeated city under King Sargon II. So later on in chapter 17, there's some theological explanation, some religious explanation why this happened. We could look at it just as purely political, but Kings takes a theological view. The people of the Lord rejected the commandments of Yahweh their God and made for themselves cast images of calves. So we've seen that before, the two bulls or calves serving as probably not images of Yahweh, but as a throne for Yahweh, perhaps in two different cities to give the idea that Yahweh sits on the throne of the whole country. They made sacred poles, worshipped all the hosts of heavens, and served Baal. Baal, the local Canaanite god in many different forms. Baal just means master. They made their sons and daughters pass through fire. I don't think scholars have completely identified what that is. They use divination and augury, but we've seen again in the Hebrew scriptures that the Israelites themselves use kind of divination and magic trinkets to get information. And they sold themselves to do evil in the sight of Yahweh, provoking him to anger. So Yahweh gets angry. So that's why he allows these large empires to come in and punish Israel for him. That is the idea behind this, that Yahweh is angry and that he doesn't support them anymore militarily, and he allows these great empires to serve as a means of punishment. And the net result is that the people are in exile. The people of Israel continued in all the sins that Jeroboam committed. They did not depart from them until Yahweh removed Israel out of his sight, as he had foretold through all his servants, the prophets. So Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day. So until the day that this text was written, which could have been 100 or 200 years later. We don't know exactly when this text was finally written, probably went through some various revisions. So these are the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and they become lost to history. Later on, we will see Judah is exiled into Babylon, but Judah is able to maintain its identity. And it is through Judah that the Old Testament tradition, the Hebrew tradition, the Israelite tradition continues. And it looks like they force the Israelites into exile and they move other people into the land. So relocation as a means of developing the land they want to. So that's in 24 and following. And so various people um, come into the land from various ethnicities, various places, and they bring their gods and their practices. And in verse 31 of 17, the Abites made Nibaz and Tak. The Sepharites burned their children in the fire to Adramelech and Anamelech. So here we have some evidence of child sacrifice amongst the peoples who came into Samaria as part of the Assyrian Empire. The word Samaria was originally just for the capital city Samaria, but the Assyrians used Samaria as a way of describing the whole nation, and that is how it was used later on by others as well. So the northern tribes have been forced into exile, and those are the 10 tribes lost to history. In chapter 18, we begin the story of Hezekiah, the king of Judah in the south. He rebels against Assyria, would not serve him. He has a long reign, Hezekiah, many, many years, and he becomes a vassal state of the king. Sennacherib of Assyria comes in, invades, destroys cities, but he becomes a vassal. He gives over all the gold and valuables in the house of Yahweh. In chapter 18:7, we see Hezekiah rebels against the king of Assyria. And so Sennacherib comes in to establish control again, and he demands various talents of silver and gold, talents like 75 pounds, more or less. And the spokespeople for the king say he is relying on Egypt. And there is an interesting passage in 1832 and following. Do not listen to Hezekiah, the spokesman for the king of Assyria says, the Lord Yahweh will not deliver you. Have any of the gods ever delivered its land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim, Hena, and Eva? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? So this is an interesting point here. Who among all the gods of the countries have delivered their countries out of my hand, that Yahweh should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? So this is a very powerful argument, in fact, that the various countries have been conquered in spite of all of their local deities fighting for them. And theologically, that has just not occurred. So this must have been a great shock for the kings and scholars and people of Israel and Judah to see their land conquered by Assyria and then Judah conquered by Babylon. In chapter 19, Hezekiah does call upon the prophet Isaiah, and we will look more at Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, shortly. Hezekiah has a prayer. Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. Then Hezekiah went to the house of Yahweh and spread it before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed before Yahweh and said, O Yahweh, the God of Israel, who are enthroned above the cherubim, so those lion animals with wings, you are God, you alone of all the kingdoms of the earth, you have made heaven and earth. So that's really an amazing statement, an amazing theological statement that is much more monotheistic than many of the other statements in the Hebrew Scriptures. You are God, you alone. So that's very much implying there's just one God of all the kingdoms of the earth. So there's sort of acknowledgement that there are all these other kingdoms with their national gods, but you alone are God. You have made heaven and earth. So God as creator. And in a sense, I think there's this initial sense that there really can be and should be only one creator God. Later on in 19, he says, in Hezekiah's prayer. So now, O Lord our God, now Yahweh, save us, I pray you, from Assyria, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, O Yahweh, are God alone. That is really an amazing statement in the Hebrew scriptures. Here we have Hezekiah praying, Israel, the northern tribes have been destroyed, and Jerusalem is on the verge of being destroyed. But here he's saying that all the kingdoms of the earth shall know that Yahweh is God, God alone. So here we're having this amazing monotheistic statement, and also that this small nation, Judah, is expecting all the nations to acknowledge their God as the one God. That is truly amazing, because Judah at the time is very small, surrounded by equally small nations. And here you have these vast empires conquering them. And it's just an amazing prayer. It's a wish fulfillment. Why would they say that? But it is here, and it's theologically and historically very important. So Yahweh hears the prayer and speaks through Isaiah in the prayer chapter 19, verses 20 and following. And 25 goes, "Have you not heard that I determined it long ago? I planned from days of old what I am now bringing to pass, that you should make fortified cities crash into heaps of ruins, while their inhabitants, shorn of strength, are dismayed and confounded, that all have become like plants of the field, and like tender grass, like grass on the housetops, blighted before it is grown." So it gets burned by the sun before it can grow. So this is the idea of theological determinism, that these events were determined by God many years ago. And amazingly, we have this um, event that Jerusalem is not destroyed in 701 BCE. There's not a good account of why that occurs. Hezekiah becomes ill, but then Yahweh changes his mind about the course of the illness, which is fascinating in chapter 20, because just in chapter 19, Isaiah has made this statement that God has ordained the destruction of these cities from the very beginning. And yet here we have, right in chapter 20, a story of Yahweh changing his mind. So this is an important theological debate. Are things determined? Does God's nature change? Many modern theologians would say that no, God does not change his or her mind. God's mind is in an eternal state of absolute infinite perfection, and it's already decided. God is not changing like a human being does not move from point to point in time, because to change one's mind means one is within time, and God is seen as being eternal or outside of time. So this is an amazing juxtaposition of two different views. In 2020, we have this amazing account of Hezekiah's tunnel. The rest of the deeds of Hezekiah, all his power, and how he made the pool and the conduit and brought water into the city, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? And this is Hezekiah's tunnel. It is about 1,700 feet, and you can still walk through it today. So what they did is they dug this big, long tunnel. It's about enough for a person to walk through. And they did it in two different ways, and then they came and met in the middle, and you can see that they were off by a few feet. So they came from both directions. So this was important because it brought water into the walls of the city, so that the source of water was hidden from those who were besieging the city. So this is an amazing historical fact. And it is called Hezekiah's Tunnel in Jerusalem. In chapter 22, Josiah now reigns, the high priest Hilkiah says he has found a book in the house of the Lord as they're renovating the temple. And many people think that is Deuteronomy. So that's an interesting way of introducing perhaps new ideas, a new history, of reworking the historical material. Say, look, we found this book in the temple. And Josiah is seen as making major religious reforms. Some of Josiah's reforms give us information about the religious practices of the day. 23:7, he broke down the houses of the male temple prostitutes that were in the house of Yahweh, where women did weaving for Asherah. So they're making clothes for the images of Asherah. He defiled Tophah, which is in the valley of Ben Hinnom, that no one would make a son or daughter pass through the fire as an offering to Molech. So again, this idea of passing through fire. Um, some people suggest that should be translated the burning of, so not just passing through. Um, what that really means is that child sacrifice, is that burning. I'm not 100% sure on. Josiah slaughters on the altars all the priests of the high places who were there and burned human bones on them. Then he returned to Jerusalem. So again, this is a time where religious allegiances are very important, and religion is a matter of life or death. The king commanded all the people, keep the Passover for the Lord your God as prescribed in this book of the covenant. No such Passover had been kept since the days of the judges who judged Israel. So this is amazing, that this idea that here is the Bible saying that Passover was not practiced even during all the kings of Israel and all the kings of Judah. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was kept. We know from external history that there were various battles between Assyria and Babylon and Egypt. And at this point, there are battles between Egypt and Babylon, and it goes back and forth. Nebuchadnezzar conquers Jerusalem because this is the start of the exile. Servants of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to the city while his servants were besieging it. King Joachim of Judah gave himself to the king of Babylon, himself, his mother, his servants, and his palace officials. The king of Babylon took him prisoner in the 8th year of his reign. He carried off all the treasures of the house of Yahweh, the treasures of the king's house. He cut in pieces all the vessels of gold in the temple of Yahweh, which King Solomon of Israel had made. He carried away all Jerusalem, all the officials, warriors, 10,000 captives, all the artisans and smiths. No one remained except the poorest people of the land. So this is an account of the Babylonian exile, the start of the exile. And then he installs King Mattaniah, Joachim's uncle, and he changed his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah rebels against the king of Babylon, and in the 9th year, the 10th month, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came with all his army against Jerusalem, laid siege to it. They built siege works against it. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him in fetters, and brought him to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar burned the house of Yahweh, the king's house, the houses of Jerusalem. The temple was destroyed in 586 BCE. So that's an important date. This is what, in some sense, the history of Israel, the history of the Israelites, has led to the destruction of the temple in 586 BCE. Why did Yahweh allow this to happen? Why did God allow this to happen? Well, the answer is because of the practices of worshiping other gods. And after the destruction of the temple, there's a second deportation. And some of the other people remaining in the area fled to Egypt.